Dude, I had to do the beanie because it's been so cold and we don't have heat here in Irvine, and I don't have a space heater, so I've been wearing the beanie to bed just to not wake up from being so cold in the middle of the night. It's cold here in Southern California, Chase.
You don't have any heat?
No.
Wow.
Matt, by the way, is the king of secretly recording people when I didn't even know you were recording. You're trying to get the what's the word that they use when you're trying to get the photographs candid? Start. Yes, the natural start. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, where we're not even like, hello, clandestine operations carried out by the American intelligence community.
And the reason we're doing that is because it's dinner at D's, baby. We're coming in through the back door per usual. We pre-ordered the fucking side salad, extra anchovies. We're willing and able.
Willing and able, baby.
Yes, sir.
All right, Jake, take it away. What are we talking about? You've been prepping.
I tried my best here, people. This is a topic I care a lot about. We're talking about clandestine operations. Clandestine is another word for secret. And we're taking a specific look at American intelligence operations. We're not exactly the only ones who do this sort of thing, but we may be the best/worst at it.
Yeah. And why do you want to talk about this, Jake? For me, I think we've talked about it a little. It's like we want to influence the culture. We want to share how we feel about things and see if other people might become more aware of things like this.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that it's good that we have publicly, allegedly officials that are beholden to us via public election. But I think most of the things that have happened in human history in terms of big events were carried out secretly, whether you're talking about Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project, whether you're talking about MK Ultra, whether you're talking about, as Mr. Bolton likes to put it, coup d'etats in the tens, if not hundreds. I think that these secret operations really do shape history unlike anything else.
All right, and we got Chase here, one of Jake's buddies. I just became acquainted with him, and now we're Beanie Brothers. But we're Beanie Bros. Isn't that is that a toy or like a thing? What are those things called?
Beanie Babies.
Beanie Babies.
Yes, sir.
We're Beanie Bros. We're Beanie Bros. Chase, it's a pleasure to have you on. And I think the idea here is we have Chase on as a guest, and we're going to go 1 through 10 from most believable to least believable. And then we're going to get Chase's take on different clandestine operations that took place by our government. So you all ready to do it?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, just settle in and no pressure. If you feel like saying something out of pocket, go ahead. If you feel like being a fly on the wall, even better.
Great. Fantastic.
All right. Actually, you just went over the structure, but just to go over the structure once again, we're going to be discussing some clandestine operations that were carried out by the United States. These operations have since been disclosed through various means, starting with something that I think is very believable, and then ending with something that I think is not very believable.
Love it. Although we do got to clarify, Jake definitely believes in all of these.
Well,
as do I, but
yeah, I'm trying to look out for the American people, the people who are tuning in, my loyal viewers. Chase, he told me the other day that we're the most listened to podcast on his Spotify, which honestly fires me up.
Let's go.
It's a fact.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do my due diligence.
All right, let's get it.
I do think the next slide is the sources that we used.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to try my best to, in post, really elucidate or enumerate rather the number of sources that we used, what sources we use exactly. The main ones that I like, starting with Chaos by Tom O'Neill, Poisoner in Chief by Stephen Kinzer, Operation Paperclip. I did the ... because it is a long title, but it's by Annie Jacobsen.
Shout out to Annie.
Yes. The Church Committee is a big one, just because it was carried out by, I think it's the Senate Committee. Is that right, Matt?
I don't know.
Well, that's okay. It was carried out in 1975. Yeah, I think it was actually 76, and the subsequent reports that came out of that committee was, I think, released the same year.
Okay.
Their focus was abuses by the intelligence community, I think in particular the CIA. You also had the Rockefeller Commission, which I think was in 75, so there may be a slight typo there.
Okay.
Seymour Hersh is a really good journalist who talked a lot about MK Ultra. And I regret to inform you all that I did use Wikipedia just to fill in the general notes that you'll see in the slides. I know, not my best work, but
okay.
I did what I did.
Wikipedia is great unless it's something so controversial there isn't already record on it. So I feel like even though Wikipedia is kind of run by government cutouts, and that's another story, another conspiracy theory to talk about, but it's kind of run by the World Economic Forum. These different NGOs are the editors of Wikipedia. I still feel like, Jake, I'm in support of using Wikipedia for the things we're going to be talking about because they have enough extensive reporting. If you start to get into something that's just theorized or doesn't have, there wasn't like a government commission on it, then it could get dicey. But to me, Wikipedia is mostly fine for things that have been cemented by years of mainstream journalism, if you will.
I mean, listen, I was surprised. Wikipedia, at least for the things that I was looking up, they did try their best to provide sources.
Right.
I have a question for you, Chase. What is your sort of list for figuring out if something is believable or not? Do you have any people that you like to, well, maybe not people in particular, because we don't want to take sides here. We're just trying to report the truth. But is there certain things, are there certain things rather that you look for?
I'd like to think that I look at sources and I try to make my own determination. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of what I'm getting is just off of like social media. And I mean, I don't know how much of that is fact checked. So to be honest, I don't do much of my own research. And I wish I could say that I do, but I don't.
I mean, Matt, how much of our stuff do we get from Twitter? A lot of independent journalism is relegated to these sites. I mean, I don't know at this point in time, I don't know if that's a bad thing necessarily.
No, I mean, we're both done reporting, Jake. Reporting is so intensive. Just doing a story on homeless people at Skid Row who use fire hydrants for water, that takes a day. I'm talking to homeless. I'm talking to the community resource people, the government, the nonprofit people. So to do all your own research from the ground up is just not something people have time for, who are working for a living, who have other lives. You have to find trusted people and do what you can. So,
I mean, yeah, Chase was telling me he's checking out air quality in cheese factories. I mean, how much time do you really have to fact check your New York Times article? I mean, I'm the same way. I try my best, but we have lives to live. So
yeah. And Chase, I want to hear, where are you coming from when you hear the term conspiracy theory? What do you think? Where are you at with things that are controversial? How do you approach them? There's from the spectrum of people who are like, hey, if I hear about the JFK assassination, I'm just turning around and walking away, to, I'm up on YouTube watching videos. Where are you at?
I would say that in the past, I was fully trusting the United States government. And my trust is dwindling over the years.
As I stroke my long beard, welcome to the clan.
Yes. The
boy.
There was a little bit of blind faith there for a minute, but there's definitely some conspiracy theories. If you went as far as to say that like Bush did 9/11, I don't think I'm there. But definitely when it comes to like insurrection and planting evidence and stuff, when it comes to like political figures and events, that's 100% that it goes on. I'm
licking my lips, Chase. This is our freaking wheelhouse, dude.
Hey, let our independent man be independent here, Jake. You're swaying him too much. You guys have a history, and you're like buddying up.
We do. I gotta say, we gotta disclose that for the podcast. If any biases, do we have a relationship, a history.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Up front, you're
disclose.
disclosing your connections, which not everyone does. I love that. Okay. Let's
But
move on.
he's gonna be, Chase is his own person. He's not influenced by Jake's beard strokes. So
No,
we'll
no,
see what he has to think about each of these 1 through 10. You ready, Jake?
Okay, I mean, you're going to have to start us off a little bit. I did want to include a warm-up for you guys at home.
You're right. I'm the warm-up. Okay.
Well, just warm-up, the reason I call it a warm-up, I mean, you're going to take the lead on this, but it's not technically an intelligence blunder. I mean, you can't argue that the CIA has its fingerprints on it, but at least colloquially speaking, most people consider it a presidential scandal, a administrative scandal by Reagan and company. So, I mean, it's just on a technicality, we're not including it in the actual list.
Okay, so if you're watching, you can see it's a level 1, but it's crossed off on the scale of 1 to 10. All right, here we go. So Iran-Contra was a political scandal in the United States that occurred during the second term of the Reagan administration. The Reagan administration officials sold arms to Iran, which was subject to an arms embargo. So we weren't allowed to give them weapons, but we were selling them weapons. Why? Because the administration wanted to use the proceeds from the weapon sales to fund the Contras. Now, who are the Contras? The Contras are a right-wing rebel group in Nicaragua. And what's interesting is when this was occurring, and this will be a theme throughout the night, Congress had already prohibited further funding of the Contras through the Boland Amendment. It actually passed 400. Now, check this out, 411-0 on December 8th, 1982. And President Reagan signed the bill December 21st, 1982. The bill outlawed U.S. assistance to the Contras for purposes of overthrowing the Nicaraguan government, while allowing assistance for other purposes. That key part at the end, while allowing assistance for other purposes, is where the Reagan administration got a little tricky. They said, hey, we are going to use the National Security Council and the executive branch of the government to go around this and also play dumb. It's a little bit tricky. And if we sell arms to Iran and take those proceeds, we're not using government money. We're not using money appropriated to the CIA. This amendment only covered appropriated funds spent by intelligence agencies such as the CIA. But I think what's key here is there was an amendment passed by people we elected. This is supposed to be a government for the people, by the people, that says you can't do this. And then the government says, yeah, we're going to do it anyways. So between 1981 and 1986, senior administration officials secretly facilitated the sale of arms to Iran. And again, the administration hoped to use the proceeds to fund the Contras, a right-wing rebel group. So those are the key points. Where do we want to go from here? Jake, you want to say something, or Chase, you want to get your quick hot take, your reaction to that?
Why are we trying to sell guns to Iran just to fight Soviets?
Well, I think there were hostages. Weren't there hostages in Iran at the time, Matt?
Yeah, so it was kind of a dual purpose thing. It was and it was not in Iran. It was with Hezbollah, and I think that would be in Lebanon. So, but Iran has a long-standing relationship with Hezbollah, so it was kind of a dual purpose thing. Like, if we go around this and we sell these weapons to them, they were in desperate need of weapons because they just had a war with Iraq, and they were relatively weak. Now they're obviously much stronger than Iraq, and they've been longstanding rivals, but they needed weapons for that purpose. And they're very tight with Hezbollah, which had, I believe, 8 hostages, U.S. citizens. And they thought, hey, we can kind of do this, say that we're doing it as a means that Iran will then do us a favor with Hezbollah and get the hostages out. And at the same time, we'll funnel this money that we made off selling these arms, which, by the way, the arms cost money. So I don't know how they didn't make money. They took taxpayer dollars, spent weapons, and then sold the weapons and funneled that money to the Contras, but then funneled the money to the Contras, and for the purpose of, basically fighting communism. The Sandistas, I think, who were in power were socialist left wing. And this was at the time when there was the big scare of communism taking over the globe, even though I think by this time, obviously, the Vietnam War was over. So the public's opinion was kind of clearly set that whole Red Scare thing was over, but not for those in power.
And I think, is it correct to say that they overcharged? I mean, this is all, I guess, kind of funny to say because they are using taxpayer dollars, but didn't they overcharge for the arms and then they used those funds that they made, like the difference is what they ended up diverting to the Contras, or is there some truth to that?
That sounds right. I did not read a full book about this. I did the basics, and that is nuance that I don't know, but I believe you, Jake.
In any event,
they had extra money and they gave it to Contras.
Do you believe this?
Don't do that.
Well, A, does this sit well with you, Chase? And B, do you believe it?
Oh, I feel like this happens to this day. It's very believable.
I think you're right. I think that
very believable.
Right.
Go ahead, please.
How does that make us, as I guess American citizens, feel that Congress could vote 411-0 one way, and then the people, the bureaucrats in the government, the people who in essence run our empire, will just decide, yeah, we're going to do this instead, and it's the opposite thing. Like, that doesn't sit well with me, and that's been going on for decades. That's tough.
Yeah, it's the clandestine nature of this that I don't like personally. I mean, to your point, I think you touched on this briefly, Matt. This is something that Reagan talked about openly. He first denied it, and then he ended up having to admit that it occurred. I mean, there were a number of hearings that occurred, 85 through 87. The actual selling of the arms and then diverting of funds took place, it looks like, from 81 to 86. But again, it should serve as a warm-up. This is sort of the secretive nature of things in Washington. They call it the third way. If you can't handle something diplomatically, if you can't handle something militarily, then you handle it in the third way, which is via clandestine operations.
Well, I feel like this is more than that, though, Jake, because that clandestine operations and covert operations specifically of the executive branch is a designed function of the president's toolbox. But Congress went so far as to Congress can overrule the president. He can't go to war, and he can't do certain things that Congress would outlaw. And this, 411-0 was said, don't do this. And then they did it anyway. So I actually think that you need to distinguish between the toolkit, which the third way covert action is part of the U.S. empire's toolkit of how to deal with things, and the covert nature within the covert operations, which is, man, we're just going to do it anyways.
Yes.
So I think there's a distinction there to be made.
Right. Also, a running theme is that the law does not really apply to these covert operations. There is an understanding between the intelligence, national security arm of the government and the Justice Department. That it's kind of all hands off. There really is no one to be beholden to in the CIA's case. In the FBI's case, maybe it's a little bit different, but certainly with the CIA, by design, they're really not beholden to any one branch of government, I don't think.
Nope, I agree. But this is the warm-up, so let's keep moving, because the warm-up's not the workout.
Okay, so level 1, Project Mockingbird. I am the teacher for the remaining portion of this.
Teach me, Jake.
Talk. Matt is going to serve as my TA.
Okay.
Chase as a student. You're doing a great job, buddy. Keep feeding us your thoughts as we go. Level 1, we're starting with Project Mockingbird. This is a documented event publicly disavowed by the CIA, right? In a 702-page document widely referred to as the Family Jewels. It's a 702-page document released by the CIA. They do make light of this operation that took place. It was a wiretapping operation initiated by JFK to identify the sources of government leaks by eavesdropping on the communication of journalists. More specifically, and I apologize for doing a little bit of reading here, a telephone intercept activity was conducted between 12th of March 1963 and the 15th of June of that same year, and targeted 2 Washington-based newsmen who at the time had been publishing news using classified materials. So, I mean, this is level 1. This is something that has been admitted to. How do we feel about this, gang? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this believable?
I mean, look how specific this date range is, like 3 months. If I'm thinking back, this seems like it's got to be like peak Cold War tensions, right, between like one was Bay of Pigs. I think was probably also early 60s, right?
I think it was 61. Is that right, Matt?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 61. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't surprise me at all, and it's really hard to dispute any of that, especially with a declassified document from the CIA acknowledging their wrongdoing.
Right. And I do think. Go ahead. Sorry.
Doesn't surprise me. I feel like, yeah, again, like I feel like this stuff just continues to go on today, but we just haven't read the declassified document yet.
Right. Think about Snowden and think about our phones, like, and think about the power of the NSA now.
Right.
To me, this is a baby version of that. Who knows what could be turned on at any moment now?
Right.
To me,
yes, this is sort of like this is a primer to the level 2 version of this. Now, the family jewels make no reference of Operation Mockingbird. They refer to it as Project Mockingbird. So there's a delineation to be made. I'd like to move on to the next slide, if that's all right, into Operation Mockingbird. I didn't feel comfortable putting a date range, to be honest. It was said to have begun in the early years of the Cold War. But essentially what Operation Mockingbird is, it functions to spread, well, again, that's the question, does it still go on today? But at least at the time, it functioned to spread CIA propaganda through the media. Now, there's a number of things to highlight here. Number one, the CIA. Matt, what is their jurisdiction? Is it domestic or is it overseas?
Overseas, but they got offices in LA.
Okay. So that's one thing that should be noted.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm trying not to laugh here because, I'm kind of coming from a different angle from a lot of people here. I've read almost too much of this stuff, but yes, you are correct. They're not supposed to really be working within the US. Their jurisdiction is overseas. The FBI's jurisdiction is domestic.
Can I flesh that out a little more, Jake?
Well,
I just wanted to say real quick, basically you can think of it as like, hey, the FBI has counter intel. Their job is, if there's Russian spies here, Chinese spies here, their job is to handle that. And they handle the domestic. Then CIA would go over and spy in other countries and then also do covert action. That's the simplest way to think of it. FBI is supposed to be defense, CIA is offense overseas.
Got it. So working off of that, that's the first thing you should note. They're working domestically when they shouldn't be. So without identifying individuals by name, the church committee, which again, my understanding is that it was a Senate committee, so comprised of senators in the year they say 75 here, but again, I do think it was actually 76. The church committee did find 50 journalists, who had official but secretive relationships with the CIA. Why is that? Why do they have relationships with the CIA? To spread CIA propaganda. That would be the reason why. Carl Bernstein, famously from Watergate, right? Bernstein and Woodward. In a 1977 Rolling Stone article titled "The CIA and the Media Expanded Upon the Church Committee's Report," he went so far as to say that 400 U.S. press members had secretly carried out assignments for the CIA. For example, Sulzberger, Alsop, and the entire Time magazine publication. So not just one journalist within that publication, but all of them. How do we feel about this? So this is documented either through real investigative journalism or through actual government committees. Do we think this is good? Do we think this is bad? Do we believe it?
It's believable. Definitely. I would like to see, did you ever find any evidence of like spreading any kind of propaganda, like what that propaganda looked like exactly?
Yeah.
Or like what kind of assignments do you know what they gave them?
I did. So in 1960, a Central Intelligence Agency cover, I'm reading this wrong. There was a pirate radio station called Radio Swan on Swan Island. This is in 1960 during the whole Cuba fiasco. this Radio Swan was a cover for the CIA. It was a covert black operation to win supporters for U.S. policies in Cuba and to, moreover, discredit Fidel Castro. So that is a concrete example of what we're talking about.
So were most of these propaganda or stories pushed by the government basically the goal was to get the U.S. population under all kind of in the same line, supporting whatever the U.S. government wanted to carry out in regards to foreign policy, or was there anything more nefarious or juicy? I mean, obviously, I think that's nefarious and juicy, but I don't know if there's something even more sinister than that. Than like, hey, you should not like Cuba and communism is bad, and here's why. Just blasting all that out.
Well, that's a good question. I didn't go into the specifics of what their actual policy points were, just because, out of respect for time. But I did just want to underline the fact that this did in fact occur.
Got it.
And it does occur today. I mean, there's another example that I didn't have time to flesh out, but there was a case of an FBI agent who impersonated a Associated Press journalist, and this occurred, I think, in the 70s. So the unfortunate thing about these secret operations is, by their very nature, they're not really supposed to be documented. So that is the issue here. But I mean, that's really all we can go off is documentation.
Right. I forgot to mention that for Iran-Contra, the administration destroyed almost all the documentation of Iran-Contra.
Yes, which is another running theme.
Yeah, we'll see that on all the levels.
Yeah, and actually, that's probably what I'll finish this level 2 operation by saying is, you take something like a FOIA request, which, Matt, maybe you can help elucidate what exactly that is, but it stands for Freedom of Information. It's a request that you can make to get documentation for certain things. And it's actually, I think there are statutes in place, there are laws in place that prevent you for asking through a FOIA request for certain CIA documents. So I think that's written into the law.
Yes. Yeah, you can't just ask for nuclear codes.
Right. So that is the other thing that I would say is, one of our phenomenal tools that we have, which is a FOIA request, it doesn't include any and all government documents.
Yeah, I think the main problem is that, most U.S. citizens would say, okay, you can't FOIA our nukes, or you can't just have our enemies be like, oh, we're journalists, like, and then FOIA, oh, what's your secret military base, blah, blah, blah. Like, I know, Jake, you're a little more extreme on libertarianism, but most of the population probably wouldn't support that. Whereas I think what's happened instead is, that justification of not giving out nuclear secrets or what have you that most people would agree with has been muddied. The waters have been muddied between that and something that should apply to FOIA, which would be, hey, was the government acting corrupt, or was it doing something that was illegal or outside of its bounds? They'll cover that up like it's a nuclear secret, which you're not. And that would be a great example of why the JFK files likely haven't been released. And Tucker, which Jake, you sent me, Tucker Carlson on some good segments on that. It basically said that the CIA killed JFK without saying it. But when you're continually delaying documents and saying it's for national security purposes, which the law allows exemptions for, but then it isn't, I think that's the real problem with FOIA, and I think that's why it's largely neutered at this point.
Yeah. Moving on to the next level. Thank you for that, Matt. I appreciate that. Level 2 to 3, Operation Chaos. Okay, so we're starting to get juicy. 1967 through 74 is allegedly when this occurred. Though again, is it still occurring today? Who's to say? Again, pardon me for my reading here. Operation Chaos was a CIA domestic espionage project targeting the American people. Established by Johnson and then expanded under Nixon, Their mission was to uncover, at least allegedly, a possible foreign influence on domestic race, anti-war, and other protest movements, essentially the entire left-wing movement at the time. Now, again, this is a CIA project. They do want to cover their ass a little bit, so they do need to say that they're trying to unearth foreign influence. So at least, plausibly it's underneath their jurisdiction, or under their jurisdiction, excuse me. Targets of Operation Chaos did include the Black Panther Party. I highlighted there just because we all, I think, know about the Black Panther Party. At its finality, Operation Chaos contained files on 7,200 Americans and a computer index totaling at least 300,000 and approximately 1,000 groups. Okay, guys, so Americans are being targeted in this case. Essentially what's going on here, if you need a sort of a distillation, Operation Chaos served to spy on and even infiltrate, in some cases, left-wing groups, the left-wing movement. So just sort of building on that, I'm going to read into my notes here. Matt, do you have any initial thoughts, or Chase, before I keep going?
I want to hear what Chase has to say, man. That's why we're all here. We want to hear what Chase
Yeah,
has.
what's up,
I want to
man?
get your take, man.
How you
We're
feeling?
all down the rabbit hole. We're all in Alice in Wonderland.
I don't believe for 1 minute that they were trying to uncover foreign influence. I think that if anything, if it's in the name of communism, or if it's or defending against communism, right, then anything kind of goes. And so maybe that was the excuse that was laid out. But as far as the actual espionage goes, I believe it. I mean, I'm sure there's record of this.
Yeah. I mean, Matt, the issue is a lot of people at this time, the government, with McCarthyism and just sort of the flavor of that era, everyone was paranoid about communism. So, even me, I do believe that they were worried about communist infiltration. But in the same breath, I will say I think it completely blinded them. I mean, they even started targeting people like the women's liberation movement. I mean, with no discernible connection to Vietnam, for example. They weren't anti-war. I mean, they were pro-women's rights. What's really the reasoning for infiltrating them? It's hard to say.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I want to contextualize this with the levels we're about to go up to. I liked what you said, Jake, that you do believe that they were trying to maybe stop communist infiltration. But what you're going to see is that the same pattern's going to play out, and it start to get more and more outside the box, or kind of, it's going to spiral in the sense that once you believe that you're doing something to the ends justify the means,
right?
It ultimately turns into, well, we're the most powerful and we need to stay the most powerful, or else the other powerful guy will become more powerful. And that's really what the Cold War was about. And that's what the current battle with China is about. It's, and I want to read this quote by Annie Jacobsen, who you referenced. She was on Joe Rogan, and she said, smart people behind the scenes, knowing this, looking at, examining it, using it to their advantage to stay where? In the pole position. That's the goal of the U.S. government. And so, yeah, there was real worry about communism, but you're going to start to see that the consequences of things, the line between things that are legitimate gets really blurry really fast when you have that power as we go up these levels.
Right. Just one more thing I'd like to note about the infiltration, because I hope we have made it clear that there was at least surveillance. But what may be more unbelievable relatively is that there was actual infiltration. CIA officers, I'm reading, expanded the program to include, the operation began developing in 1969 its own network of informants. So this issue of informants is actually critical, because we see this in the modern day. For the purposes of infiltrating various foreign anti-war groups. Now, Matt, I know you're familiar with, there's a lot of cases that this pertains to, but the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping case, that had to do with informants. Informants are used all the time. Mr. Epps on January 6th is another example, if you want to go there. But do you have a good grasp on what it means to be an informant?
Do I have a good grasp? Not too particularly. I watched Ozark.
Okay.
I saw
I mean,
how
beyond the obvious, which, maybe it's obvious that informants, they are typically people who have committed crimes and are looking to get a lenient sentence. So the government will typically come to a criminal and say, hey, I'll give you X amount of years off of your sentence, potentially in exchange for you doing some stuff for me. It's typically how it goes. And I know that that's very general, but informants can do a lot of things. And it's not just feeding information to the police. It's doing more active things. It's not just passive information gathering, which seems almost passive to me. There are more active aspects of being an informant. One of these is infiltration in this case, where if you are a criminal and you want to get a lighter sentence, you can go to the FBI, or more likely the FBI can go to you and they can say, well, why don't you do some spying for me? And so that is one of the things that may have played out here.
Yeah,
Comes to mind. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This reminds me of the Chicago 7. That
Elaborate.
whole, right? And there was definitely some infiltration there, if I recall. And I don't remember if it was FBI or CIA, right? But they were trying to gather info on, that was a protest or something that happened at the DNC, I believe. And that was in the late 60s as well.
Yeah.
So that's the same time. But yeah, obviously I wasn't alive to be around for that, but that was a big deal, I think, at the time, right? Yeah. With all the information coming out of that government groups were at least related or like having communication with some other groups in society. So that was huge.
Yeah, I would add that it's at least been documented by like left-wing publications like BuzzFeed recently with all the January 6th stuff. When the FBI infiltrates white supremacist groups, you don't necessarily have to be a criminal. I think the leader of one of these white supremacist groups, it wasn't like he was imminently going to be arrested. Yeah, he might have been in trouble, but some of these people who infiltrated and were planted, it's hard to know how much they were already there. They're getting paid for it. You don't just have to be a criminal getting a lenient sentence. They can pay you, $50,000, $10,000 a month, and you're literally the head of a white supremacist group, and you're facilitating things that will incriminate others. That would be like the Gretchen Whitmer planned kidnapping in Michigan, which was around 2020. There's informants who are being paid by the FBI to almost facilitate these crimes. So
yeah, I did not know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll send you a really cool article by BuzzFeed if you're down.
Yeah, please do.
The whole thing.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things to talk about here. We do want to stay relatively focused, but it's a great point that Matt brings up. Yes, and the kidnapping case is a great example of this infiltration and facilitation, which I think is so bad and evil, and the rest. To go so far as to cause crimes, that's really bad, and that does occur. A perfect example being the kidnapping case, but we do want to stay focused. Moving on to level 4 to 5. Thank you. It is a continuation of the same surveillance type operation, but this time it's coming from the FBI, which, if you guys don't know anything about J. Edgar Hoover, there's a lot of good stuff on him. He was an absolute character. Paranoid does not begin to describe Mr. Hoover. He thought communists were everywhere. And the CIA was, the FBI, the CIA, they all thought alike. They all thought that they were all McCarthyites, I would say.
And they're all power hungry, so they hated each other too at the same time, and were fighting for power.
Right. So this happened in 56 through 71, allegedly. It may still be going on. Who knows? COINTELPRO was a series of covert and illegal, underline illegal, because that's not good, obviously. Projects actively conducted by the FBI in this case aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic American political organizations. So I'm upping the level on this because of the example I'm going to give of COINTELPRO in action. But just sort of finishing up this slide here, targets did include activists of the civil rights movement and Black Power movement. So civil rights movement coming before the Black Power movement. So starting with the likes of MLK, ending with the likes of the Black Panther Party. The one example I have here on the next slide, Matt, I mean, it's pretty, when I found out about it, I mean, I was shocked. I was disgusted. I was shocked. I mean, it's pretty bad. Do you know a little bit about this, or should I take the lead on this?
Just go off. Can you read the letter? People should hear it.
Can we zoom into it? Let me see if I can get on it. I could probably zoom in here if I try my best.
I can read it too.
Can
it's
you?
a little small for me.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay. So this is to Dr. Martin Luther King from the FBI. In view of your low-grade, abnormal, personal behavior, I will not dignify your name with either a Mr. or a Reverend or a Doctor, and your last name calls to mind only the type of king, such as King Henry the 13th and his countless, this is a little small, sorry, countless something of adultery, countless acts of adultery and immoral conduct lower than that of a beast. King, look in your heart. You know you are a complete fraud and great liability to all of us Negroes. White people in this country have enough frauds of their own, but I am sure they don't have one at this time that is anywhere near your equal. You are no clergyman, and you know it. I repeat, you are a colossal fraud and an evil, vicious one at that. You cannot believe in God and sin as you do, act as you do. Clearly, you don't believe in any personal moral principles. King, like all frauds, your end is approaching. You could have been our greatest leader. You, even at an early age, have turned out to be not a leader, but a dissolute, abnormal, moral imbecile. We'll now have to depend on your older leaders like Wilkins, a man of character, and thank God we have others like him. But you're done. Your honorary degree, your Nobel Prize, what a grim farce, and your other awards will not save you, King. I repeat, you are done. No person can overcome facts, not even a fraud like yourself. Lend your sexually psychotic, sexually psychotic ear to the enclosure. You will find yourself and all your dirt, filth, evil, and moronic talk exposed on the record for all time. I repeat, no person can argue successfully against facts. You are finished. You will find on the record for all time your filthy, dirty, evil companions, male and female, give an expression with you to your hideous abnormalities, and some of them to pretend to be initiators, miniatures. It is all there on the record. Your sexual orgies. Listen to yourself, you filthy, abnormal animal. You're on the record. You have been on the record. All your adulterous acts, your sexual orgies extending far into the past. This one is but a tiny sample. You understand this, yes. From your Terrius evil Plamatex, you will understand this. On the east past, and then it looks like something was blanked out, and others on the west coast and outside the country, you're on the record, King. You're done. The American public, the church organizations that have been helping, Protestant, Catholic, and Jew, will know you for what you are, an evil, abnormal beast. So will others who have backed you. You are done. King, there's only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days in which to do. This exact number has been selected for a specific reason. It has definite practical significance. You are done. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is bared to the nation.
So I'd like to take a deep breath before we continue. A nice physiological sigh. Thank you, Dr. Huberman, if you know what that is.
I just looked at some morning sunlight today, baby.
But yes, for the uninitiated, this is shocking, I know. Chase, how are we feeling?
Who is this letter from exactly?
It's from FBI agents. So I'm gonna in the description when we publish the episode, I'm gonna put the article that I'm using here that I'm quoting from. But yeah, just to sort of clarify what exactly this letter is, it was sent by FBI agents to King and his wife. More specifically, a package was sent containing this strange letter and a tape recording. A wiretap on King had been authorized. James Comey, who you may remember from the 2016 election, who headed the FBI at that time, I believe, he used to keep a copy of the King wiretap request on his desk, quote, as a reminder of the Bureau's capacity to do wrong.
Wow.
So this is very much a documented occurrence. As for the tape recording, if you were listening to the word that this agent used, I think was enclosure. I think he's referring to, in this case, the tape recording.
Mm-hmm.
The tape recording, my understanding was recording of him having whatever, an orgy or some sort of sexual acts were taking place, and they just so happened to have wiretapped him, so they had that as a recording to send to him. So it's pretty bad.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds like it was written like a bit by a disgruntled neighbor or something.
Yeah, they're definitely
the wording of
insinuating
it
the
is just
person's black.
not very formal at all.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
yeah, that was the point.
But it's sort of formal in the sense that they have the tape recording and they're showing their power by that they're spying on him. It's
right.
Like,
that adds a whole other layer.
Yeah, and the person who's writing is definitely pretending to be black, or they were black,
right?
Because they're saying you let our race down. So
yes,
right.
Yes.
No, and I understand that this is where it kind of starts to fly off the rails. I am acutely aware of that. This is not something that a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah.
But just sort
of something that the FBI or CIA has published or like declassified?
Well, so this, I don't know what archive this comes from. That's a great question. I'm going to try my best.
Wait, I have it here.
Do you?
This is crazy. On March 8th, 1971, an activist group called the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI burglarized a local office of the FBI in Media, Pennsylvania, and stole classified documents. Part of these documents revealed COINTELPRO, and during the church committee hearings and investigations, a copy of the suicide letter was discovered in the work files of the deputy FBI director. He has been suggested as its author.
There you go.
So this all was set off by basically like a citizens movement, which is kind of crazy. And then the investigation of COINTELPRO by Congress, they found this copy of this letter in the files of the deputy FBI director. So it sounds like this letter is somewhat legendary within the FBI, given that Comey kept a copy on his desk. So this is I know we're calling this like a conspiracy theory thing, but we still haven't gotten to things that like the government would dispute. We're still at level 5. We're still at things the government acknowledges happen.
Right. I'm most concerned that this is the first time I'm hearing about this. That's what I'm most concerned about right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, think of it from the government's perspective. If you have somewhat of an influence on the media, would you want this to be consistently circulated?
Of course not.
Of course not. So if you want to believe that the media is entirely impartial and is not beholden to the government or has no ties to the government in any way, shape, or form, then this is unbelievable. Why would they not report on something like this? But and again, I'm trying my best to stay focused on what we have prepared today, but the Twitter files came out recently, and it has become clear that the FBI was working hand in hand with Twitter to censor.
Like 100 agents, like 100.
What?
Yeah, dedicated to Twitter.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I remember when I found out about this maybe a few years ago. I don't know if it was it was around my time in journalism school, and I was shocked too. And my personal psychology, I remember reading it, was like, wait, they're saying that Martin Luther King is like cheating on his wife, and I thought he was like this perfect saint, and then I realized that I looked it up, and he was basically cheating on his wife like every night, like going around in circles cheating constantly, like he was a serial, just like a sex addict. And
Right.
the FBI got that on him, but my psychological reaction was to like not want to believe that. And so I think there's a
Yeah.
point where the people have to take responsibility, because Jake, you're saying, oh, hey, these are things where we start to lose people. But the government documented this. The government doesn't dispute this. It's us. It's our own psyches that don't want to face these uncomfortable truths at a point. So I think as we move up to level 10, things get really uncomfortable. But we want to blame the government, and if we're a government formed by the people, part of it is our fault. Like there's things that I don't want to believe. There's things that my friends don't want to believe, because we don't want to take that responsibility. And it's a dark, ugly truth. I think psychologically we'd rather, there's a lot like an ignorance is bliss aspect to some of this too.
1,000%. And I want to be respectful of Chase's time. I know
Yes,
that we do have to keep moving. Okay. So again, this is deep water here, folks, but we're keeping on. Okay. So level 5 to 6, Operation Mongoose. Okay, so again, a date range, I would say it was around the early 60s. I did neglect to put a date range on there. I apologize, but essentially we're probably not going to spend that much time on this one, to be honest. But it was an extensive campaign of terrorist attacks. That is strong language, I know, but against civilians and covert operations carried out by the CIA in Cuba. I mean, honestly, we're going to spend next to no time on this, just considering what else we have to go through. But it is important to note, and Matt, maybe you have some thoughts on this. The Bay of Pigs invasion is another disclosed CIA operation, handled almost exclusively by the CIA.
Yes.
And that's something that everyone knows about. That's something that's written about in textbooks. So that's not disputable, I would say. But something that may be disputable, according to some people, but that is actually documented, is that, among other things, the CIA enlisted the aid of the mafia. The mafia were eager to get Cuba out of the way. It was a financial, there was a financial aspect to it for the mafia. They wanted to regain their Cuban casino operations. Cuba was encroaching on a lot of their business. So they had no issue doing this. William Harvey was one of the CIA case officers who directly dealt with a mafioso by the name of John Roselli. The mafioso, John Roselli, was introduced to the CIA by former FBI agent Robert McHugh. McHugh had known Roselli since the 1950s and was aware of his connection to the gambling syndicate. Gambling syndicate, I don't know what they mean by that. I apologize. But it does go on to say, under the alias John Ralston, Roselli was tasked with recruiting Cubans from Florida to help in the assassination of Fidel Castro. Just going through this very, very quickly with the next slide, if you don't mind, Matt, just so we can get a picture of Mr. Roselli. There he is, right there. I think it was the church committee, if we go on to the next slide, they documented at least 8 separate CIA-run plots to assassinate Castro. So again, this is disclosed. This was disclosed in the church committee report. This was talked about in the Senate hearings. But again, it's something that not a lot of people believe.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to kill him like 634 times. I just Googled it again. Not that Google's the truth, but they were obsessed with killing Castro. And our government, yeah, it's kind of, just to add some color, they were literally obsessed with, they hated, I feel like they hated Cuba more than anything else and became obsessed with it.
Whoa.
And ironically, they wanted to sabotage his scuba gear. They gave him bad scuba gear as a gift through other governments, all these different things. So there's some ridiculous assassination attempts, but they basically were obsessed with overthrowing Cuba and hated Fidel Castro a lot.
Wow.
And that number that, Chase, I want to hear your thoughts, but that number that Matt threw out, that's according to Fabian Escalante. Fabian Escalante had been long tasked with protecting the life of Castro. He was sort of one of his right-hand men. So that number comes from Fabian.
Okay. So there were lots of attempts, though. At least dozens.
But does this disturb you, Chase? I know, I mean, you're probably still reeling off the FBI letter, to be honest. I would be too.
Yeah.
How are you feeling so far?
Believable. Definitely believable. I'm ready to hear some real conspiracy.
Okay, here we go.
Go on. Operation Paperclip. Okay, so this is where I start to have some fun, because even to me, this is still juicy. This was elucidated at great length in Annie Jacobsen's book. She's been on multiple podcasts. You know, me and Matt have talked about the term conspiracy and conspiracy theory ad nauseum. I hate the term conspiracy theory because there's a stigma with that term. The term conspiracy is, you know, it's a secret plot. So there is a difference there. You know, it's semantics ultimately, but I'm sort of going off on a tangent. But
no, it's just conspire. You should just say conspire. Humans conspire. It's a verb.
Right.
If you made everyone use the verb instead of the noun, or I don't even know what a noun is anymore, but I know what verbs are.
Yeah.
If you just make people use the verb, then
so
it would go away. The problem, the stigma would go away.
Between 45 and 59, it says here. So you have to remember the context. We have just gotten out of World War II. We're in the pole position, as Miss Jacobsen likes to say. And we really do want to stay on top. You know, we want to be the world police. We want to be the big guy on the block. So essentially what occurred was we took a lot of personnel. So let me just kind of read here, because it's put very well in the PowerPoint slide here. Operation Paperclip was a secret intelligence program in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from the former Nazi Germany to the U.S. for government employment. This was after World War II in Europe. So the reason I'm not saying necessarily CIA, even though this was a CIA operation, is my understanding, is coming out of World War II, I think they were still called the OSS. Certainly during World War II, they went under the label OSS, Office of Strategic something. I apologize. I should know what that stands for.
Strategic Services.
Strategic Services, thank you. But there was a name change. So on a technicality, I didn't say that this was a CIA operation, but it really was. Moving on, many of these personnel were former members and some were former leaders of the Nazi Party.
So, I mean, Chase, are you familiar with this? I mean, this was a juicy one from you when I found out about it. One example would be Wernher von Braun, who became the head of NASA, was a former Nazi.
That's on the next slide. That's on the next slide.
This is the first time I'm hearing this. And so I'm assuming that all these people were brought over just to further U.S. interests.
Yeah, it was like, hey, we need to beat the USSR.
Okay.
They're not going to scoop all the Nazi scientists who are also occultists, which is interesting in how deep you want to go on the rabbit hole. How did they come up with all of their breakthroughs? It's definitely a fact that they tried to use occult means to like conjure spirits to have scientific breakthroughs, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem like that far of a reach. I mean, just because in the same way, right, we recruited Einstein. I know this like probably pre-World War II, but I believe our government also recruited him in some manner.
Right.
But
I guess when you learn about the Nuremberg trials and you think about justice, at least this is what I thought about when I learned about it, was like, oh no, they have to be executed. We have to do what's right. No, there was anyone who had value, anyone who could be like, would have scientific value to make our power greater. They were exempted from the justice system and were basically free to live in the United States as long as they were integrated into our empire.
And I could understand bringing German citizens over that were maybe not directly party leaders, right? But as soon as you start to bring over political leaders within the German system and then integrating them, that could be an issue, a conflict of interest for sure. Yeah, especially like you were saying with the Nuremberg trials going on and trying to, hold all these people accountable for, what's the word I'm looking for? So, accounts against humanity.
Yeah.
That's, and it doesn't seem like that's fair. But yeah, please tell me more. Continue.
Well, Chase, I just want to point out one thing, which is, I'd like to think that I know you at least fairly well. I know Matt pretty well from, both of you guys from my time at university. Most people, I would say, I would like to think that us three, at the very least, maybe I can't speak for everyone, most people operate on a moral plane. They think that some things are good, some things are bad, and when things like this are presented to them, they have a bad feeling in their stomach. A lot of people in government, you'll come to find out, especially the more you read about this stuff in particular, they have been conditioned out of that way of thinking. It's really out of, they would say it's out of either a fear of communism or a love of America that they do a lot of these things. But there's countless accounts of FBI and CIA operatives after having retired really not being able to live with themselves. Once they sort of wake up, sober up from the drunken state that is intense patriotism and McCarthyism, a lot of these people do wake up to the fact that they've done horrible things.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Annie Jacobsen, she tells a story of some of her sources, including for this book she wrote. That's kind of what Jake was referencing, was people like that. And she tells a story of, in her opinion, that the U.S. government mutilated children, disabled children, to try to create what they found in UFOs. And then a government official confessed that on his deathbed to her because he felt so guilty about it. So that's kind of a really disturbing example, but that was the one that came off the top of my head. So apologies to having to hear that, but
yeah, Chase, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to ask, you mentioned McCarthyism three times now, and I'm not really familiar with that term. Would you mind enlightening me?
Matt, why don't you take the lead on that one?
You probably know more. I mean, Cold War history is one of my least favorite areas of history. But I mean, I know McCarthyism would just be an umbrella term, I think, to describe the strongest far-right extreme reaction to the risk of communism spreading over the globe and a need to stamp it out by all means necessary.
Named after McCarthy, who was, I believe, a senator or I think a senator right at the time. He led a bunch of hearings against people who were blackballed in Hollywood for being communist sympathizers or members of the Communist Party. So the term comes from him. He was known for saying that, there are communists everywhere. Government had been infiltrated by communists. And he really became popular for going after communists. And then he eventually ran out of government because he went too far. According to the majority of people, he saw communists in his sleep. So he did eventually fall out of favor, but that's where that term comes from, is from Senator McCarthy.
Do you think a lot of the general U.S. paranoia stems from that idea?
Of Russia today? Is that what you're saying?
No, just at the time.
Yeah.
I guess, the domino effect and all that, right? Just the idea that communism would eventually spread. That whole started with McCarthy, is what you're saying, basically.
Well, it was definitely personified by McCarthy, that sentiment.
I see.
Definitely. I mean, it's something that you said earlier, Chase. We weren't alive during this time, but I think a lot of people during that time were scared of communism, and McCarthy was stoking those fears. He was riding on those fears. He was fear mongering. That was sort of his way to become popular at the time.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and one might reflect on what fears are being stoked today. What are the current themes of today that might be being weaponized against people? That's something we could all reflect on.
Yeah, I'm in Portland. I'm in Portland now, and everything's on fire. and there's riots everywhere, and the city's in shambles. The city's in shambles. So
Really?
Yeah.
no, but that's what you hear. I feel like on the news, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
That's a
like, wait,
fair
where do you go
point.
with
That's a
this?
fair point.
Right.
Yeah. Matt brought up Wernher von Braun, completely destroyed my punchline. But yes, he was a member of the Nazi Party. Annie Jacobsen goes so far as to say that he was friendly with Hitler. I didn't put that in there because I wasn't able to source that appropriately. But later, a pioneer in rocket and space technology in the United States, von Braun is widely seen as, quote, the father of the American lunar program. So you could argue that he essentially started NASA or was critical in its getting started. Chase, who do you think Wernher von Braun is pictured with there in the slide?
Oh, I'm gonna take a leap, and he almost looks like Walt Disney.
It is Walt Disney.
Okay.
So Wernher von Braun worked with Walt Disney on a series of films which popularized the idea of human space travel in the United States and beyond between 55 and 57. I mean, von Braun, he was a huge figure in the Nazi Party and a huge figure in the American lunar sphere. I mean, again, the father of the American lunar program, some might say. So, I mean, this was totally covered up. This is something that no one, either they didn't know about it or they didn't want to talk about
it. And without getting too off topic, in the past I do recall coming across either just in conversation or on the internet of Walt Disney being a Nazi sympathizer or something, right? Without putting too much thought into that, that's just what I've heard, and it'd be interesting to kind of look into that a little bit more. It has never come across my mind again until today.
Yeah, certainly. It is a good point. I mean, there were people in the U.S. at that time who, for some reason, it did go hand in hand with isolationism. Maybe you know more about this than me, Matt, but there was a famous pilot who was known for being Nazi sympathetic, and he was also a isolationist before entry into World War II. I think it was, I want to say Hindenburg, but I think that is wrong. The general point being, there was, I mean, it wasn't non-existent, this feeling of, at least it was rumored that some people were sympathetic with the Nazis at that time before entrance into World War II. I'm not going to say that was a popular thing to ascribe to, but yes, I have heard that also about Walt Disney. And here he is pictured with Mr. von Braun. So that is our Operation Paperclip sort of breakdown there. Unless you guys had any comments on that operation, we're going to move on to Operation Northwoods. Level 8 to 9, the reason I'm placing it at an 8 or at a 9 is because it didn't actually occur. It wasn't carried out, in other words. But it is very well documented as having been proposed. It was proposed in 1962. Matt, you seem very excited about this one. It was signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and presented to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. If you've ever seen The Fog of War, Mr. McNamara talks about our involvement in Vietnam. This was an intended plan to, among other things. Well, first of all, let's talk about this term false flag operation.
Well, Jake, you gotta not bury the lead, man. You gotta come in guns blazing in first sentence. What were they gonna do?
Well, among other things, if you want to move on to the next slide, they did call for operatives from the CIA to both stage and actually commit acts of violent terrorism against American military and civilian targets.
So that included like shooting up movie theaters, blowing up airplanes, killing U.S. citizens as a false flag to invade Cuba.
Yes.
And this is a real documented plan. Back to the last slide. This has been released. This really happened, Chase. Our own government proposed killing our own citizens.
Yes. So thank God it was rejected by Kennedy. This is at this point. I don't know if this is actually something that Kennedy said, but it was rumored, I think, in a New York Times article that he said, "I'm going to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces." If he did say that, it would have been around this time, around the Cuban Missile Crisis, around the Bay of Pigs failed invasion, that he began to have a sizable distaste for the intelligence community and for the military. I mean, they didn't think they were worth 2 cents. Military intelligence, he didn't really think much of it, especially after all of this Cuban nonsense and shortly before his assassination. Go ahead.
No, Chase, what do you think? Our own government, and I could send you the actual release document after so you can read it yourself, the memorandum. How does that feel? I mean, you were like, what?
And obviously I'm glad that this wasn't carried out, at least to my knowledge, any part of this. But I had the first thing I can think of is just like, is this one bad egg in the FBI or whatever organization that is proposing this idea and it was shot down? Or is this like a collective, like who put this plan together is what I want to know. Who was it? A single person? Was it a group within the CIA? I'm just curious. And then it was obviously brought forward and rejected, which is great.
Yeah.
It looks like it was drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and signed by Chairman Lemitzer and sent. So the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, excuse me, signed it himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, I don't even know who that is within our
That's
government.
like the leader of the military.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the actual military leader of the military, and then the civilian leader of the military is the Secretary of Defense. So the head of our military signed off on this before sending it to Kennedy.
Yeah. And before we move on, because I know we do need to move on, I do want to explain what exactly a false flag operation is. This is something that's thrown around on, right-wing websites, and, it's memed a lot, false flag. A false flag operation is, by definition, an act committed with the intent of disguising the actual source of responsibility. So just to be very clear, what this was calling for is for American military to kill U.S. civilians and then make it seem as if Cuba did the killing. So the idea being, once the public thought that Cuba killed all these people, they would want to go to war. Okay. So we do have to move on, unfortunately. I know that is extremely unbelievable. At a level 8 or 9, Operation Northwoods, thank you very much. We're moving on to level 9 to 10. If we do have time, we can always put this in post, but I do have a little bit of a primer, a video, if we don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, lube me up.
Okay, give me a sec here. I mean, yeah. Chase, any more thoughts on Operation Northwood while I pull this up?
This is the previous slide.
Yeah.
That I mean, as much as I want to deny it and call it conspiracy, it's really difficult when I have the evidence sitting right in front of me.
So you do want to deny it, though. You're like, this can't be real. Your initial thought.
I mean, why wouldn't you? It's
for the same reason that I'd say that, MLK didn't have crazy orgies.
Right.
He's just like been always, he's always been presented in a good light. He's a reverend, right? A reverend would do that. So yeah, I like to think that the government has been also held in a similar light to me, where they wouldn't do something like that to instigate a war, right?
Jake, you already, even though Chase has to go in a few minutes, you kind of already blew up his evening. He's going to be going out with friends. He has plans, and he's just going to be thinking about Operation Northwoods, thinking about the MLK suicide.
I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight.
He's going to be like that meme where it's like the dude up in bed, and the girl's like, what is he thinking about? Does he want to break up with me? And it's just Chase thinking about MLK or thinking about Operation Northwoods.
I'm sorry.
Operation Paperclip, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to see if this plays. Let's see what we got here.
I'm good. I'm going to send a text, but I'm good on time.
Okay, we'll
Okay.
try to wrap up though. Okay, does this have audio?
I can hear it. Can you hear it?
No, but if you can
No.
hear it,
I can hear the crackling.
yeah. Is it supposed to be
Well, I
talking?
can hear that.
No, I mean, maybe you could just scoot up a little bit to the part where there's actual people.
Okay.
These opening scenes
There you go.
are being shown to provide a composite picture of the high state of training of the men making up the troop, and also to provide a comparison with their performance on the second day when under the influence of the drug. Notice the wide dispersion of the section commanded by the sergeant as it moves across the open country.
Jake, what are we watching here? You're so
As
stoked.
they advance into
What
the
else
woods,
is going
which
on?
could be
So
occupied by
yes,
the
no,
enemy,
this
they
is
move
stuff that I
at the
love.
top.
I guess I could read this while it's playing. I mean, it's just sort of
Thereafter,
ambiance.
movement
Okay,
cautious
to be
on
honest.
alert.
Record
Continuous
of the Moneybags
observation being
trial,
maintained.
abbreviated version of Small Change. What this is in the UK,
Notice again the general area.
they gave LSD to some soldiers, and they
Okay.
essentially just wanted to see what would happen.
And what are they doing here? I'm seeing them marching around in the woods.
Yeah, the aim of the trial was to test the effect of LSD on the behavior of troops in field conditions.
Okay.
So I'm really not attributing any intent or like, why did they do this? That's not really the point here. The point is just to show that in the UK, December 4th, excuse me, from the November 27th through this December the 4th of 1964, the UK, let's see, volunteer subjects, 41 Royal Marine Commandos engaged in a field exercise after, quote, imbibing the hallucinogen LSD. So this is just something that happened, okay? And where are we getting this video from? We're getting it from the Imperial War Museum in the UK. So this is, again, something that has been disclosed, something that is documented. I'm not necessarily trying to attribute any intent, you know, I'm not trying to say, the point is not to say why, it's just, the point is to just show that this did happen, stuff involving drugs.
Okay, so they gave soldiers drugs, LSD.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
There's
that's just a primer.
Unknowingly, did they know they were going to be drugged?
In this case, they were very good, Chase. In this case, they were volunteers, so they were knowingly given the drug. Is my
Sign me
understanding.
up.
Okay. I mean, listen, you're not wrong. I don't blame you.
Okay, Portland.
Okay. So why don't we move on? If we're done showing the video, we're going to move on to the next slide. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Here we go. Next slide.
Okay, so MK Ultra people, this is the big shebang. If you guys, I really do want to hear your thoughts on this because I do want to keep it very simple, honestly, because in my opinion, it's the most unbelievable out of all the operations. I don't want to inundate people with information here because even on its face, it's something that is unbelievable. So MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program. It was designed and undertaken by the CIA. The date range we're going with here is 53 to 73. Okay. So a 20-year period we're alleging here in this slide. The program was intended to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Okay, so understanding the context here, we had just gotten out of Korea. This was in 52, 53, I think, is when we officially got out of Korea. You can correct me on that if I'm wrong, Matt. But there was a lot of talk that Americans who were captured as prisoners of war in the Korean War were brainwashed into saying bad things about America, about our government. They were televised, quote, confessions of having dropped germ bombs on, I think it was I forget where the field of play was. I think it was South Korea. Was it where this took place, or was it North and South? I don't know if it had even
North and South.
Was it North and South? Okay.
Well, it would have been our side, the South dropping in the North, I imagine.
Yeah. So the general point being that these Americans, these were televised confessions, having been captured by, I think the Chinese were involved at this point. These American pilots, is my understanding, confessed to having dropped germ bombs, engaged in germ warfare. This is something that is thrown around occasionally, this term. It's something that to this day we do not admit that this occurred. We do not endorse this point of view that we engaged in germ warfare. But that aside, we're coming out of this Korean War in this atmosphere of, okay, brainwashing is possible.
Yeah.
The term brainwashing, some argue, comes from an article that was released in the 50s by a journalist that actually did end up, it was disclosed, working for the CIA. I believe his last name is Jackson. I apologize, I don't have the full name on me at this point. But he released an article that that's really one of the first times we see the term brainwashing.
Yeah. Could I add a little color, Jake?
Please do.
The general sense, from what I've heard about it, is that it's like, hey, they're seeing these guys confess, and instead of using Occam's razor, like, oh, they got tortured, so in order to stop getting tortured, they said all these bad things about the U.S. They're literally prisoners of war. The government freaked itself out and decided that they were worried that these other governments had mind control drugs.
Yes.
And so that was the impetus for MK Ultra.
Right.
So the story goes.
So the story goes, yes.
Regardless, MK Ultra happened. Whether
Right.
that's the origin story or not, that's the legend.
So at its simplest, at its most tame, I would say, what we were trying to do is develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. So at its most tame, this was just an attempt to catch up with what other people already had. Okay.
Yes, again, wanting to stay in the pole position.
All right. So we move on to the next slide. This is something that occurred during that time. Several known deaths have been associated with MK Ultra. Frank Olson, there's a phenomenal, I repeat, phenomenal show on Netflix called Wormwood on this very subject. Eric Olson, the son of Frank Olson, goes into great detail as to we're going to find out, death of Frank Olson. Frank Olson, a United States Army biochemist and biological weapons researcher, was given LSD without his knowledge, so without consent, in November of 1953. He later died by jumping out of a 13th story window. Initially, it was described as a suicide, okay? I believe the exact terminology that they used was he jumped or fell. Very curious language that they use, even initially, in describing his suicide, his alleged suicide. The CIA's own internal investigation concluded, that the head of MK Ultra, a man by the name of Sidney Gottlieb, had conducted the experiment, so had given Mr. Olson the LSD. The report goes on to suggest that Gottlieb was due a reprimand, quote unquote, as he had failed to take into account Olson's already diagnosed suicidal tendencies, which may have been exacerbated by the LSD. Now, this is heavily contested. Wormwood is just one of the places in which this account is heavily contested. A lot of people suggest that Olson was very disturbed after coming to the conclusion that some of his research that he did in germ warfare, among other things, was being used to kill people. He was, and again, I'm going to try my best to put the sourcing on this in the description when we publish the video. There are people who suggest Mr. Olson was going to be a whistleblower on the entire MK Ultra program, and that's why he was drugged. Okay, so to keep the lid on this whole thing, Some people do allege that Sidney Gottlieb basically wanted to have him executed. Okay, so by giving him this drug and disorienting him, completely disturbing his mind state, and then later, there's a manual. It's a lot of layers to this. There's a manual that is publicly available, a CIA assassination manual that calls for a number of things when assassinating someone. One of the things that it calls for is if you're going to throw someone out of a window, you want to do it on the 13th story. Okay. And I'm going to try my best to find the documentation for that. Another thing that the manual suggests is that you want to subdue the person you want to assassinate. You want to hit them on the head between specifically one of the eyes to knock them out before throwing them, in this case, out of a window, out of a 13-story window. So it's interesting. It's elucidated beautifully in Wormwood. This, what they first claim is a suicide, later it's suggested that it's not. The government will never go so far as to say that they executed Mr. Olson. I mean, obviously, but it does seem like they follow the assassination manual that was produced at around the same time to the T, to the letter, when carrying out this killing of Mr. Olson, which again is it's not something I expect someone to believe on its face. I do want to move on to the next slide unless you guys had any comments.
Well, I mean, before you could have someone kind of get into the weeds of Olson, you'd have to start with, I guess, the government is showing people that the government is giving under this project was giving psychedelics to people without consent, drugging people without consent to experiment on them, right?
Right. So one of the, I believe it was a grand total of 49 sub-projects under the umbrella known as MK Ultra. One of these sub-projects is called Operation Midnight Climax. Okay, so this was carried out in San Francisco. Safe houses were redesigned to resemble brothels. Okay, and so
this is crazy when I first heard about it.
This is crazy, right? So a man by the last name of White, I think, was the head of this sub-project. Member of the CIA is my recollection. He would set Johns up to be dosed with psychedelics, let's say LSD, and they just wanted to test different conditions under which someone might be more predisposed towards giving up sensitive information. So having them have sex with a prostitute and then also dosing them with LSD and sort of subjecting them to different conditions. So almost setting it up like a study and seeing how that would affect the John's mentation, how it would. Go ahead.
My understanding, Jake, and please add color, and Chase, this is crazy. They literally had like a one-way wall where the scientists could see through, and then it would be like one of the walls of this like supposed hotel room where the guy would come to have sex with the prostitute. The scientists would just be looking through the wall and studying what was happening. It was like a see-through wall, like a one-way
two-way mirror, yeah.
Yeah, two-way mirror. And so how are they administering LSD, though? I forget.
So there's been people who have alleged that it was aerosolized, so it would be put into the room, which would obviously also get the prostitute. So you would get, I mean, two innocent bystanders, but by my definition, but you would also get the prostitute and not just the John.
The John.
Under the influence, right? That's just one of the many ways. But that is a great question. You know, how would they actually go about doing this?
Right. Okay.
Chase is scratching his beard. He's stroking his beard. I love it.
We're there. We made it full beard.
Yes, full beard. That's where you want to be, man.
I mean, the whole drugging aspect, unknowingly. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the Tuskegee experiments and syphilis, of course, on that whole population, and they had no idea that they were being given a disease, and that was like a 40-year-long experiment. So if we're thinking about that, I mean, this is not much further.
Right. So, and again, I'm just trying to, there's so many aspects to MK Ultra. It's so far reaching and just really hard to pin down. And again, the documentation is so scant. Before leaving their posts, I think it was, forgive me, I think it was Alan Dulles and Sidney Gottlieb. I'm forgetting the head of the CIA at that time, the director of Central Intelligence, but certainly the architect of MK Ultra, along with, we don't have time to talk about Mr. Jolly West, who was a co-conspirator, but certainly Sidney Gottlieb was at the very top of this MK Ultra before leaving office, before leaving their positions at the CIA in, I think, 73. Both Dulles and Gottlieb ordered that all documents related to MK Ultra be destroyed. Okay, which even that alone in a vacuum is suspicious. Why would you want to have documentation destroyed if you're a fan of transparency? But so that is the reason why we don't have a complete picture of MK Ultra in particular, is they really didn't want this project getting out. And one of the primary ways in which MK Ultra was disclosed to the public, I think, was through financial records. I think a man by the last name of Marks, who was within the CIA, decided to become a whistleblower after he found financial records related to MK Ultra. So thank God that he was around at the time. I think that was in the early 70s. But just trying to touch on a few what I think are key points, at least somewhat documented points. We're going to move on to the psychic driving experiments that were conducted in Canada, if you don't mind. So you might say, Jake, why are we talking about this? This took place in Canada, point taken. But this operation, or this sub-project, was still funded by the CIA. So I do believe that it fits within my purview for this discussion. The CIA, I'm reading here, exported experiments to Canada when they recruited British psychiatrists and, I think at this point he was a former head of the American Psychological Association. This is not a second-rate psychiatrist we're talking about here. This is the psychiatrist, okay? Head of the APA at one time, Donald Ewan Cameron, creator of the psychic driving concept. I just want to talk about what the driving experiments consisted of, because this is some pretty dark stuff here. Putting subjects into drug-induced comas for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements, often carried out on patients who entered the institute. This was carried out at McGill University. There was a specific institute that neighbored McGill where the actual rooms were where these patients would be taken to. But while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements, often carried out on patients who entered the Institute for Common Problems, I would recommend that you check out the Fifth Estate. It's an investigative program from Canada that I don't know if it's still around in 2022, but at least I think in the 70s, they did a lot of great stuff on this. They carried this out oftentimes on patients who entered the Institute for Common Problems, such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression, many of whom suffered permanent effects from Dr. Cameron's actions.
Wow.
And I apologize, I didn't take out that citation there. But his treatments resulted in victims, among other things, urinary incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting who their parents were, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. Okay, so
It's messed up.
yes. Do we like this? Do we not like this? Do we believe this?
I'm curious. I would like to look into this more. I think it's very plausible. Do you know, did you read into any more why they moved the experiments to Canada, just so that they would be less likely being discovered, or is that really the big reason there?
It's a phenomenal question. One of the simplest answers that I can provide is that Dr. Cameron was willing to do it, and he was stationed in Canada. That's where he was working. that's one of the simplest answers I can provide. But that's a great question. Why did they do it in Canada, and why isn't Canada open to disclosing this information?
Right.
A foreign agent in your country was conducting illegal human experimentation. Why wouldn't you want to disclose that to the public?
Right.
If it's true.
Right. Where like the Canadians, illicit in this as well. Were they helping in some way or some manner?
They could have been. I mean, I think the takeaway is that it's just disturbing. And what I said earlier is once you're committed to being in the pole position, there's nothing you wouldn't do. Tuskegee syphilis experiments, like it's just another instance of ends justify the means. It's another instance of understanding the psychological profile of people who are in these powerful positions. They want to do what they want to do because they want power and they're willing to do bad things. And they wanted to have mind control. That'd be a very powerful thing to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think, of course, we think it's bad. But my mind, and we should maybe say this for another episode, is what are we going to do about it?
Right. Or is there something to be done, at least as far as the public sector is concerned? Are they? We're
talking about it. So at the very least, Jake, you think, setting up this podcast, it's worthy of discussion. That's something to do.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something to do more than talk? Just talk?
Yeah. No, you're right. And just to sort of round out this discussion on MK Ultra, an obvious question you may have is, okay, so were we successful? Were we able to control minds? Well, if you ask Stephen Kinzer, the author of Poisoner in Chief, he would say no. Okay, it was a fantasy from the jump. We were being influenced by, the fantasies of the day, science fiction, and we were not successful. If you ask someone like Tom O'Neill, which I don't want to get into that because that's, it does touch on a lot of these operations, but he is talking about Manson specifically and how he may or may not be intertwined with these things. Tom O'Neill would say yes, we were at least somewhat successful in controlling minds. But
which would mean we still have that ability,
right?
Yeah. Well, not we, them.
Yeah. We should probably move on to the next slide and then end with a nice discussion. Well, here's a document, a proposal for, I think, one of the sub projects of MK Ultra. I just wanted to include that in there. And again, we will be trying our best to provide more sources for those of you who are interested. But that's a proposal for, it is proposed. Well, anyways, the point being, we do have some documentation on this project. I did want to include this. I don't know if I. Here's the thing, you guys. Here's the thing. At the time that I wrote this was my hope that you will leave this presentation distrusting the United States government, if not government globally. But at this point, I'm not so sure if I believe that, Matt and Chase. I think really what I can hope for is that we put the valuable information out there. I don't know if I want to qualify it. I don't know if I want to say that it's good or bad, because maybe that's a step too far. I think all that I can really feel comfortable doing is saying, here is the information, do with it what you will.
All right.
Is that fair?
I think
I guess.
No? Talk about it.
No, I'd say, like, if you have a moral framework and you think these things go against your moral framework, then you would say that you would hope that people think these things are bad. And if you don't like these things and you don't share the values of the people doing them, in essence, I set out a framework for why they might, in the sense that ends justify the means, maintaining a pole position, keeping the empire strong, ruling, and doing what's necessary to be the most powerful. If you don't share those same values, then, the natural conclusion would be to distrust the government, or at least conclude maybe a step further that you don't share the values that the people who run our government have, or that you have a different that you have a different worldview, or that you don't think it's okay to do anything necessary to stay in power, which are the types of people who naturally end up in powerful positions, as evidenced by things like I don't know, every political TV show ever.
Chase, I have a question for you.
Yeah, but before you ask that, real
Go
quick,
ahead.
I mean, just my initial thought is like, I almost like none of this is very surprising to me, as I'm sure with most viewers. I think even at your like level 10, that nothing is really out of reach to say. I would even go so far as to say that almost, while of course I don't condone any of this at all, that these are almost like necessary evils of like government, like whether or not it's our government doing it or Russia or China. I almost think that with how we have society set up, at least at a government level, that these things are going to happen. And I'm not saying that we have to accept it, but they're just going to continue to happen in one way or another.
Well, Chase, I did want to ask you, do you think that we can be blinded by ideas that are bigger than us? Something like, say, patriotism, something like, say, social justice, something like, say, a God. Maybe that's too big of a question.
In reference to like political activity?
Yeah, sure. Or, things in general, waging war in the name of,
Right.
the American Revolution, in the name of liberty, wanting to start a new nation. Or in the name of, in the Middle East, we want oil. We're going to wage a war to get oil. Can we get lost?
That point has been proven again and again, right? That when people have a fundamental idea or like a common enemy, right? You have some scapegoat. It makes it easier for an agenda to be pushed, right? And I think that's what a lot of these have in common, right? Whether it's espionage on domestic U.S. citizens, right, in the name of communism, it's a lot easier to justify these actions when you have a common enemy.
Right. We're talking about propaganda here, Matt. And isn't that what our show is all about, is pointing out propaganda?
Absolutely. I think we just want to open people's minds and have a Caesar salad with some anchovies, Jake.
Ain't that the truth, brother? All right. Whether it's a conspiracy theory on the one hand or truth on the other, we're keeping it fresh, we're keeping it live, and we're keeping it wholesome.
Amen. And the Beanie Bros were here right alongside you, Jake.
All right. Amen and God willing. See you guys next time. I bow.
Peace, peace, peace.
Peace, peace, peace. Peace, peace, peace.